My nephew slid his phone across the passenger seat without looking at me. He kept his eyes on the road, both hands on the wheel, jaw tight. The screen showed a single text he'd typed but hadn't sent yet. I read it twice. Don't sign anything today. Tell them you need more time. Then call me the second you're alone. I looked up at him. He was still staring straight ahead. Just trust me, he said quietly. Please. I'd known Daniel his whole life. I'd coached his Little League team when he was 9. I'd driven 4 hours to watch him walk across a stage and get his finance degree. In 31 years, I had never once seen that particular expression on his face, the one that sat somewhere between trying to protect someone and trying not to fall apart. I put the phone down on the seat between us. I didn't say a word. He pulled up in front of the attorney's office on Clearwater Drive, the one my daughter had chosen, the one she'd scheduled without asking me first, the one she'd described as just a formality. He put the car in park and finally turned to look at me. Dad would have told you himself, he said. I'm going to tell you instead. My name is Roger, and I am 68 years old, and I spent 34 years as an electrician in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I am not a complicated man. I like my coffee black, my football on Sundays, and my porch in the evening when the heat breaks just enough to breathe. I raised 2 kids in a house on Magnolia Creek Road that my father helped me build in 1989. That house is paid off. That house is mine. Or it was. My wife Carol passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After she was gone, I rattled around in that house alone for about 6 months before I figured out what my new life looked like. It looked quieter than I wanted, but it was mine. My daughter is named Sandra. She's 41, lives 20 minutes away in Prairieville with her husband Keith and their 2 kids. We had Sunday dinners every few weeks, birthdays, holidays, the usual. I won't say we were close the way Carol and I had been close, but she was my daughter, and I loved her. I didn't question that. A man doesn't, not until he has to. My nephew Daniel is the son of my brother Frank, who died of a heart attack 6 years ago at 63. After Frank passed, I made a point to stay in Daniel's life. He works in commercial lending at a bank in New Orleans. Sharp kid, quiet. Takes after Frank, he thinks before he speaks, which in my experience is a quality worth more than most people understand. About a year after Carol died, Sandra started bringing up my finances at dinner. Not in an aggressive way, not at first. It would come up gently, the way you ease into cold water. Dad, have you thought about what happens if something happens to you? I told her I had a will. I'd had one since Sandra was born. I know, but I mean day to day. Your accounts, the house. If you had a stroke or something and couldn't manage things, you'd need someone who could step in. I told her I'd think about it. She brought it up again 2 weeks later. Same table, same gentle voice. Then again the month after. Each time she had a new angle. Keith sometimes chimed in with something he'd read, some statistic about seniors and financial vulnerability, said with the kind of careful, clinical concern that always made me feel like I was being managed rather than loved. I didn't say that out loud. I told myself I was being uncharitable. Last fall, Sandra told me she'd found a good estate planning attorney. She made the appointment herself. She told me it was for peace of mind and that she'd drive me there so I wouldn't have to deal with parking downtown. I mentioned it to Daniel one afternoon when he called to check in. He went quiet for a moment. Which attorney? He asked. I told him I didn't know. Sandra had set it up. Can you send me the name when you find out? I thought that was an odd thing to ask. I texted him the name from the appointment card Sandra had left on my kitchen counter. He didn't respond right away, and I forgot about it. The morning of the appointment, Daniel showed up at my door at 9:15. The appointment was at 10. I hadn't told him I was going today. Sandra had. He asked if he could drive me. I said Sandra was coming to pick me up. He said he knew. And he looked at me with those frank eyes, the ones that don't blink when something matters, and asked if I would ride with him instead. I called Sandra and told her Daniel was going to bring me. She got quiet for a second in a way that I registered but didn't fully understand. She said fine. She said she'd meet us there. In the car, that was when he slid the phone across the seat. Sitting in the parking lot on Clearwater Drive, Daniel told me what he knew. He had recognized the attorney's name, not from reputation from a case his bank had been involved in 18 months prior. A woman in Kenner, 74 years old, had come in trying to refinance her home. Except the bank's records showed the property had already been transferred through a power of attorney that the woman insisted she'd never signed. The attorney handling that transfer was the same man Sandra had scheduled my appointment with. The case had settled quietly. Daniel wasn't supposed to talk about the details, but he knew the shape of the thing. He said he couldn't tell me Sandra was doing what that other case looked like. He said he didn't know that for certain. He said maybe it was coincidence. Maybe Sandra had just found a name somewhere and didn't know. But he said if I walked into that office and signed a general durable power of attorney today, which he suspected was what they were going to put in front of me, I would be handing over legal authority to manage my assets, sell my property, and access my accounts, and I might not fully understand that from the language they used. I sat with that for a long moment. I thought about Carol. I thought about the Sunday dinners. I thought about Sandra at 9 years old, sleeping against my shoulder on a long drive home from her grandmother's house in Shreveport. I thought about Keith and his statistics about senior vulnerability. I thought about the appointment card that Sandra had left on my counter without asking if I wanted to go. "What do you want me to do?" I asked Daniel. "Tell them you want to take the documents home and have your own attorney review them first. Don't apologize for it. Just say it like it's the most normal thing in the world, because it is." Sandra was already inside when we walked in. She was standing near the reception desk, talking to a woman I didn't know, and when she saw Daniel beside me, something crossed her face. She covered it fast. She smiled. She hugged me. Keith wasn't there. I noticed that. She'd always said we when she talked about this appointment. The attorney's name was Pressler. Gray suit, soft handshake, the kind of practiced warmth that probably worked well on most people. He led us to a conference room with leather chairs and a pitcher of water and a folder already sitting at my spot at the table. Sandra sat across from me. Daniel sat beside me. Pressler went through his introduction, estate planning, peace of mind, protecting your legacy, the usual language. Then he opened the folder and started walking me through the documents. I let him finish his explanation. Then I picked up the folder and closed it. "I appreciate this," I said. "I'm going to take these home and have my own attorney look them over before I sign anything." The room shifted. Not dramatically, nobody yelled. But Pressler paused a half-second too long, and Sandra's posture changed. She leaned forward. "Dad, we've already been through all of this. This is just standard." "I know it may be," I said. "And if it is, then it'll still be standard after my attorney reviews it. I'll call you next week." I stood up. Daniel stood up with me. Sandra followed us out to the parking lot. She waited until Pressler's door was closed behind us, and then she grabbed my arm. "Why did you bring him?" she said. And she wasn't asking about Daniel the person. She was asking about the interference. She knew the word him made that clear. "He's family," I said. "Dad, I am your family." I looked at her for a long moment. She had Carol's eyes, green-gray, the kind that looked darker in overcast light. Standing in that parking lot under a November sky, hers looked very dark. "I know you are," I said. "That's why I'm going to call you next week." I didn't call her next week. I called my own attorney first, a man named Howard Gill who'd handled my will and Carol's estate. Howard is 72, semi-retired, and has no patience for anything ornamental. I faxed him the documents from Pressler's folder. He called me back in 2 hours. He said what Pressler had prepared was not a limited power of attorney for specific medical decisions, which is what Sandra had described to me over those Sunday dinners. It was a general durable power of attorney with broad financial authority. Authority to manage bank accounts, sell real property, make investment decisions, and act on my behalf in virtually any financial matter without requiring my approval for individual transactions. "This is not a peace of mind document," Howard said. "This is a blank check with your name on it." I asked him what I should do. He told me to do nothing, say nothing, and let him make some calls. 3 days later, Howard called back. He had spoken with a contact at the state bar. There had been a complaint filed against Pressler 18 months ago, the same case Daniel had known about from the bank side. The bar had found insufficient evidence to discipline him, but the complaint was on record. Howard said that didn't mean Pressler was criminal. It meant I should be careful. Then Howard asked me something I hadn't expected. "Roger, has Sandra had access to any of your accounts already?" I thought about it. She knew my bank. She'd driven me there once when my car was in the shop. She knew the name of my brokerage firm because I'd mentioned it at dinner the previous Christmas when I was talking about the market. I hadn't given her any account numbers. I hadn't added her name to anything, but I remembered something. About 8 months before, Sandra had come over to help me set up a new laptop because mine had finally died. She'd spent most of a Saturday afternoon on that computer. I'd sat in the living room watching the game, and she'd come in and out asking me passwords and usernames for various things. I'd told her what she asked. I hadn't thought twice about it. I told Howard all of that. He was quiet for a moment. "Check your statements," he said. "All of them. Everything from the last 12 months. I spent 3 days going through statements at my kitchen table. I am not a detail man by nature. Carol used to handle the household finances, and I handled the physical things, the house, the cars, the maintenance. After she passed, I'd learned what I needed to learn, but I wouldn't say I was meticulous. I checked my balances regularly. I didn't scrutinize line items. When I started scrutinizing, I found 7 transactions in my brokerage account over 10 months that I did not recognize. They were not large enough individually to trip any alarm. The biggest was $4,200. They were coded as transfers to an external account. I had no record of setting up an external linked account. Total, across all 7, $19,400. In my main checking account, I found 4 recurring charges to a financial planning service I had never heard of, going back 11 months, $89 per month. I had never enrolled in any financial planning service. I sat at that table for a long time after I found all of it. $19,000 is not everything I have. It would not have ruined me. But that is not the point. And I knew that was not the point, even as I sat there doing the math in my head, trying to make it feel smaller than it was. The point was that someone who knew my passwords and my account names had linked an external account to my brokerage and had been moving money out of it for the better part of a year. And the only person who had sat at my laptop, asking me for usernames and passwords, was Sandra. I called Daniel. He came over that evening. He looked at the statements without speaking for a long time. Then he looked at me. "Have you talked to her?" I said no. He said, "Don't, not yet." He said, "Go back to Howard first, and then go to the bank, in person. With Howard, if possible." He said, "Don't call Sandra. Don't text her. Don't change anything about your behavior. Because if she suspects you know, money can move faster than any investigation can follow." I asked him how he was so calm. He said he wasn't calm. He said he'd pulled over on the way to my house and sat in a gas station parking lot for 20 minutes before he could drive again. I understood that. I was his father's brother. Sandra was my daughter. There is no version of this that doesn't cost something that can't be counted in dollars. Howard came with me to the bank. The branch manager, a woman named Patricia who'd known me for years, took us to a private office and closed the door. I showed her the transactions. She pulled up my account while we sat there. Her expression was professional the whole time, which I appreciated. She didn't perform sympathy or outrage. She just looked at the numbers and told me what she saw. The external account linked to my brokerage was opened 11 months ago. The address on the linked account was a P.O. box in Prairieville, where Sandra and Keith lived. Patricia helped me freeze my accounts pending investigation, change all my login credentials, and file a fraud report with the bank's security team. She told me they would be required to report to the appropriate authorities. Howard told me he was filing a separate civil complaint. He also told me I could choose not to cooperate with any criminal investigation if I wanted. I told him I didn't want that choice. I told him I'd cooperated with choices long enough. The hardest part was the 10 days between filing the report and the morning 2 investigators showed up at Sandra's door. I didn't call her. I sat in my house and watched the light move across the walls in the evenings the way Carol used to love. That late afternoon gold that comes through the western windows in October and November, and I thought about everything. I thought about every Sunday dinner. I thought about every time she'd steered the conversation to my finances, every time Keith had nodded along with his careful statistics. I thought about whether she'd done this out of greed, pure and simple, or whether she'd talked herself into believing she was just taking what would eventually be hers anyway. I thought about the night Carol died. Sandra had been there, in the room, holding her mother's hand on one side while I held it on the other. She had been genuinely devastated. I had no doubt about that. Whatever she became after, she had loved her mother. I had to hold on to that. It didn't change what she'd done, but I needed to hold on to it anyway. Daniel came by most evenings. We watched football and didn't talk much. He'd make sandwiches. He's a terrible cook. Always has been, but he tried. That counted for more than he knew. On the 9th day I got a call from Sandra. She didn't say she knew what was happening. She said she just wanted to check in, that we hadn't talked in a while. Her voice was careful in a way it had never been before. I said I was fine. I said I'd been busy. I said we'd catch up soon. After I hung up, I went out onto the porch and sat there until it was dark. The investigators found what they needed. The linked external account was in Keith's name, not Sandra's, but her phone had been used to set it up, and the login history for my brokerage account traced back to an IP address registered to their home network. The $89 monthly charges were traced to a shell account Keith had opened under a business name that did not exist. Sandra's attorney later argued that Keith had acted without her full knowledge, or that she hadn't understood the scope of what she was participating in. I don't know what she told herself. I don't know what she told her kids. I know what the evidence showed. They both accepted plea agreements. Keith received 4 years. Sandra received 18 months and 5 years probation. The judge in the case said something during sentencing that stayed with me. She said that financial exploitation of a family member often hides behind language of love and protection, and that the disguise makes it more harmful, not less, because it weaponizes the trust of someone who never thought to defend against the people closest to them. I thought about the words peace of mind. I thought about how many times Sandra had used that phrase, peace of mind, as if signing away authority over my own life was the path to peace. The money was recovered. Not all of it immediately. The civil process took another 8 months, but Howard is thorough, and the bank's fraud protocols are more powerful than I'd understood. The $89 monthly charges were refunded going back to the first one. The $19,400 in brokerage transfers came back in a settlement that also covered my legal fees. I finished that process with more money than I'd started, technically, though the accounting always felt obscene to me. I am still in my house on Magnolia Creek Road. The porch is still there. The western windows still do that thing with the afternoon light. I made some changes. Howard helped me establish a revocable living trust with Daniel named as successor trustee, which means if something genuinely does happen to me, someone I trust completely will handle my affairs under legal obligation, with oversight built in. I set up account alerts for any transaction over $200. I changed my passwords and I did not share them with anyone. And I never will again. Not because I've become a suspicious person, but because I understand now what I didn't understand before. That protecting what you've built is not the same as distrusting the people you love. You can love someone and still maintain boundaries. You can love someone and still say, I'll have my attorney review that. Those two things do not contradict each other. My granddaughter, Sandra's daughter, is 11. Her name is Lily. She sends me drawings sometimes, taped into envelopes with too much tape the way kids do. I keep them on the refrigerator. None of what her parents did is her fault. I call her on her birthday. I will keep calling. Daniel came over last month and we sat on the porch with coffee and watched a thunderstorm roll in from the south the way they do down here, slow and enormous and inevitable. He asked me how I was doing with all of it, meaning not the legal part but the other part. I told him the truth. I said I was doing better than I expected and worse than I wanted, and that most days that felt about right. He nodded. He looks like Frank when he does that. I think about what would have happened if he hadn't texted me. If he hadn't shown up that morning, if I'd ridden with Sandra to that appointment, if I'd sat across from Pressler and signed a folder full of language I didn't fully understand, because my daughter had set it up and I trusted my daughter. I think about how ordinary that version of the day would have felt. How unremarkable. How easy. The money would have moved faster after I signed. The house would have come next. I understood that once I saw how far things had already progressed. Prairieville has a notary on every corner and a title company 2 exits up the interstate. These things can move quickly when someone has the authority and the access and no reason to think you're paying attention. I was 68 years old and I almost stopped paying attention. Not because I was old, not because I was confused or declining or forgetting things. I want to be clear about that. I stopped paying attention because I loved someone, and love has a way of making you feel like vigilance is an insult. It isn't. Vigilance is respect. Respect for everything you worked for, everything you sacrificed, every hour on a job site in Louisiana heat, so that the house on Magnolia Creek Road would be yours free and clear, and so that your wife could spend her last year in a bedroom with windows she loved and not in some facility somewhere. Because the money had run out, you owe it to yourself to pay attention. You owe it to everyone who ever worked beside you, everyone who ever loved you, everyone who is going to need you to be okay when they're grown and the world gets harder than they expected. Pay attention. Check your accounts. Not because you're paranoid, but because you're the only person who is legally and morally accountable for your own financial life. Set up alerts. Know what is in your accounts and where it's going. If someone uses the words estate planning or peace of mind to move you towards signing something you haven't read, slow down. Take it home. Call your own attorney. That's not paranoia. That's adulthood. If someone you love takes that personally, if they get quiet in a parking lot when you say you want an attorney to review the papers, pay attention to that too. The people who have your best interests at heart will wait for you to be ready. They will not schedule the appointment without asking. They will not follow you out to the parking lot and grab your arm. I am 68 years old. I mow my own lawn. I make my own coffee. I make my own decisions, and I live with the consequences of them. That morning in the parking lot on Clearwater Drive, I chose to trust a quiet young man with my brother's eyes, who had pulled over at a gas station before he could face me. That was the best financial decision I ever made. If you are watching this, and you have a family member helping you manage your finances, I am not telling you to distrust them. Most people are not Sandra and Keith. Most people who help elderly parents with their accounts are doing it out of genuine love, and I know that. But I am asking you to stay involved. Keep your name on your accounts. Understand what you're signing before you sign it. Have your own attorney, not one someone else found for you, one you found yourself. Know where your money is and where it goes. And if someone in your life starts using the phrase peace of mind every time they talk about your finances, sit with that for a minute. Peace of mind is what you feel when you understand your own situation. It is not something someone else can hand you in a folder. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. And subscribe if this story meant something to you, because there are more of them, and you should probably hear them.